So this is a first in a series of webinars for the Sussex Wildlife Trust Wilder Community Campaigners, where we'll be going through a bit of a whistle-stop tour of all things campaigning and just covering an introduction to the subject. I know there are quite a number of our Wilder Community Campaigners who aren't able to attend tonight, so we will be recording this meeting so that everyone is able to take in all of the information. There will also be a bit of time for a chat at the end of the webinar amongst ourselves. But if you or anyone watching the recording have any follow-up questions or information that you'd like to bring to the group, then please do just post it on our space on Sussex Planning Network for Nature, and we can follow it up on there and have a conversation on there. That's what it's there for. It's there as a platform where we can communicate with each other. It's an ongoing conversation, and it's really sort of a hub of activity. So it doesn't end just at the webinars. Feel free to interact with the platform and ask all sorts of questions. That's great. So just some quick housekeeping. So yeah, feel free to turn off or on your camera during the presentation. The key thing is just if everyone can remain muted during the presentation, that'd be great. And then feel free to unmute during the discussion at the end. So on that, we'll get into it. So firstly, before we get into some of the introductory concepts of campaigning, we first really need to sort of define what we mean by campaigning. And we can do this very simply by just looking at the dictionary definition of the word campaigning, which in very simple terms is to work in an organized and active way towards a particular goal. And typically this is either a political or a social one, and environmental included within that as well. And this is still quite a basic sort of definition and concept around campaigning, and doesn't really give us like kind of too much information for what campaigning really is and what it's all about. Apart from perhaps you could sort of pull out the word organized there, that we'll come back to in a future slide, just sort of to really own in on that as a concept. But what I'd like to do just now is just highlight a few different examples of campaigns, just to help us again with that definition of what campaigning really is. So firstly, we have our Wild Sussex. So this is Sussex Wildlife Trust's overall strategy for its work between 2024 and 2030. So it's the driving force behind our decision making, our conservation project delivery, our communications, our fundraising, and all the aspects that make up what we do. And it's essentially our organizational campaign. It's what leads everything we do. It's our brand, it's our vision, and it clearly defines our environmental goal. And that relates back again to that definition there of that particular goal. That is our goal there. We have our environmental goals that are all framed within this particular document that forms the basis for our campaigning as an organization. And next up, we have an example of a campaign that is probably a lot more like what we would think of if someone was to ask us the question of or give an example of campaigning. This is grassroots campaigning, and this is in particular a incredibly significant historical and cultural moment that has changed so much for social justice and equality, and that's the suffragette movement. So people like Emily Pankhurst was one of the leading voices in the movement to win the right for women to vote, and is an incredible example as a person, a leader who's been able to organize a community to campaign for social change. And finally, we have an example that I'm throwing in here very much not because it has any ability to stand up against the previous example in its ability to enact social justice changes by any stretch of the imagination, but that it showcases the breadth of our definition of campaigning. So advertisement and marketing can have campaigns, and these campaigns can be the driving forces of their commercial success. So this example in particular, we're using Nike's "Just Do It" slogan. It has it has an identity. You know, we all know the tick, and if you hear the words "just do it," most of us would then instantly associate it with Nike or Nike. I never know how to pronounce it. Uh, and this is much the same for things like I'm loving it and McDonald's or Every Little Helps and Tesco. You know, I imagine there were some very well-paid marketing experts that spent an incredible amount of time and money just to get those three-worded slogans. But they're ad campaigns, so they're therefore a form of campaigning in a way, and just like the others, they're working in an organized and active way towards a particular goal, albeit in this example, it's a commercial or monetary goal. And this ultimately comes from the ability for companies like these to have a brand, have an identity, much like any group or organization that's wishing to sort of lead and front a campaign and trying to enact change. So enough about things like commercialism and that sort of thing. So on this slide, I want to sort of start to consider some of the points from the previous slide, but direct them towards what we're wanting to learn about tonight, which is campaigning and how to organize a successful campaign. So I just want to introduce you all to this gentleman on the slide here, Marshall Ganz, who is considered to be the guru, sorry, of community organizing in the United States. So he's had a variety of different sort of successes and achievements. Notably, he was really integral in working with the United Farm Workers for about 16 years, I believe, to really sort of progress like sort of farm workers' rights. And he's also as well been credited with devising the successful grassroots organizing model and training for Barack Obama's 2008 presidential campaign, which was successful campaign. And his models for community organizing are used across the field to really help shape campaigning for a huge range of non-profit groups. And in Gans's model, he has 5 key questions to essentially ask yourself when you're creating a campaign. And these are used across campaigning circles, and you might hear the same sort of 5 questions, but just ever so slightly, differently worded here and there. But they are essentially, what are you aiming to achieve? Who is your audience? And specifically, when we say who is your audience, who has influence over this matter? So decision makers. What do they care about? How do you target these issues? And then finally, what tools do we have and should be applying to this? And we're just going to briefly explore these questions in a little bit more detail, and that's going to form the sort of the basis of this webinar. So firstly, what are you aiming to achieve? So you can ask yourself, what is the goal of your campaign? Why are you looking to start a campaign? And this really comes back to what we were talking about with the examples at the beginning. So in order to implement a successful campaign, we really just need to go back to the basics and set out those aims, that vision. It will help to identify what good looks like, and therefore be a really good sense check and progress check for how your campaign is going and what it's delivering on. And there are a multitude of different goals in campaigning for nature that you might individually have. So I won't go over this in much detail, but I just want to highlight a few different examples just to give a little bit of food for thought for what it might mean to for you to create your campaign and what success looks like and what those goals look like for that sort of very, very nuanced situation for each individual campaign. So as an example, it could be that you're looking to protect a local site at risk of development. And there could be many layers to this. So I would imagine that, in an example like this, the absolute best case scenario outcome would be the development just simply does not go ahead, and that will be what what you'd be working towards in terms of your sort of campaign goals. But But you'd also, at this point, for an example like this, you'd also need to consider what what are the fundamental red line issues around your goals as well, especially when it comes to development. Unfortunately, a lot of the time when you're, campaigning to stop development, a lot of the times those developments can get through and can get approved. And so it's what are the sort of the key aspects of what you're campaigning for and against, that are sort of, the sort of no-go zones of like kind of, if it does get through, what simply is just not good enough, and what is there that you could, argue for and against in certain aspects of it. So, this could be, if the development does go through, what's the area within that sort of red line boundary of a development that is just that would be no good whatsoever for whichever aspect of nature that you're trying to kind of conserve in that area. So where would be the sort of best case scenario for if it was to get approved, where those housing, for example, where they would be built. So it's just all those sort of considerations of like kind of what are those top line kind of goals for what you're trying to achieve in that particular example. And there are others that you could be looking at. So things like looking to influence policy to increase funding for nature. So this is a really common goal of conservation organizations. But it's a really broad goal as well. So at this stage, it's helpful to again pull out some of those kind of key aspects of policy that you're looking to have changed, and importantly, what does good look like in terms of sort of the deal that nature's getting in terms of government funding. So what levels of funding does nature need to be successful? What are the sort of those realistic opportunities there that you might be able to look in your campaign, and getting all of that written down so that like kind of what your sort of hard line goals are again. And then our last example is one where you might be looking to ban certain kind of chemicals or practices that are harmful to nature. So an example of this, that's been in the news over the past few years is things like neonicotinoids. So neonicotinoids are a insecticide that have a lot of bad press, and rightly so, over the past few years for its impact on pollinators. For anyone that doesn't know what neonicotinoids are, they're essentially an insecticide that are applied to the seeds before they're sown of crops, and they are a systemic insecticide. So they go through the entirety of the plant and provide protection for all aspects of the plant. But because they're systemic, what that then means is that the insecticide is also within things like the nectar and pollen. So for the sort of the pest species that they're looking to control, it doesn't just target those that might be eating the foliage and sort of the key aspects of that crop, that they're looking to preserve, but also as well all of the pollinators, the many different pollinators that would be taking the nectar and pollen. So it's a really harmful chemical that a lot of conservation organizations have been looking to get sort of a blanket ban on, and there's been temporary moratoriums on reducing the sort of the level of neonicotinoids that are being sprayed on the seeds across the UK, and there's been an ongoing battle in that. So it's a good example of an ongoing campaign that a lot of conservation organisations are looking to really try and enact change and reduce down the use of these harmful insecticides for the natural environment. So again, it's just like sort of looking at what does good look like in this particular scenario of what you're trying to sort of achieve. So there were quite a few things that I was sort of covering in that previous slide. So I thought I'd just sort of summarize it very, very nicely and wrap it all up into something that I know I'm very familiar with, which is our strategy again, Our Wild Sussex. So at Sussex Wildlife Trust, we run a variety of campaigns to achieve our vision, and our vision for between now and 2030 is that we would like to see a Sussex that's rich in wildlife, which is valued and protected by everyone. And this is a really broad vision. So we have, again, we have to sort of look in a little bit more depth at the certain aspects of how we might go about delivering that and what good looks like. And so we have things like our goals and our strategic goals, our strategic transformations, priorities, and values, and this really gives the trust a much clearer idea of what we're looking to achieve and what good looks like. And any other size campaign should also identify those key aims of what you're trying to achieve, so that you can ensure that you're staying on track. There's always going to be a huge amount of nuance to each individual campaign, but if you follow these sorts of steps and you just really simplify that process and just lay out that vision and those key goals, it can really help to better organize your campaign. And again, it comes back into that definition of campaigning and having an organized and sort of structured way of delivering change. So now we're just going to quickly move on to our second question, which is audience. So who is your audience, or really, again, like I said before, who has influence over this matter? So I'm just adding that in just to clarify that right now what we mean by audience are the decision makers. So those who are able to influence your campaign and to get you the outcome that you want. So most commonly, the main two types of audiences for a lot of local campaigns will be your local MP, who will be the voice of their constituency in Parliament, alongside as well things like local councillors, who will be the voice of the residents within their local authority. And within these two roles, there are a variety of other decision makers that you would include in your list when you're writing out that list of decision makers and that audience there. So, what are the specific council committees that your matter is relevant to? So who sits on those committees, and those are the sorts of people that you would want to put onto that list, because they're representing your local authority on that particular sort of matter within that committee. And then as well, like who is the representative for environmental aspects, which again leads into sort of things like the committees of a local authority, but also at the national scale as well. You might be looking at national campaigns and that sort of thing, and this would be the Secretary of State then that you would be looking at. A different example of a decision maker would be if you were campaigning for something like for clean water. So you would then, in that instance, you would look at these, the varieties of decision makers I've already outlined here as, potential sort of sources of opportunity within your campaign. But then also as well, you might look to target things like the CEO of a utilities company that operates in your area. But then on top of that, you'd also be considering, who are those other influences in that circle as well? Like, where does that water company sit? So, who are their like kind of influences as well? So it's just trying to get as many of those decision makers as possible on a list, and then looking at who are going to be those sort of key and integral targets for your campaign. So you've now created your list of stakeholders or decision makers, and you want to ask yourself, what do they care about? So you'll probably have already considered this question a little bit in the previous exercise of identifying the decision makers, but this is the time to just write all of that down properly. So what are their motivations to succeed? So it could be their political or their social motivations. It could be something, financial. Are there groups or individuals that they are looking to sort of showcase to? So, are there other people in positions of power that you could like kind of leverage to sort of have that open up that conversation with that particular stakeholder, that decision maker? A lot of the time, if they hold a political position, one of the main aspects that they care about is voter perception. Although it's still a bit too vague to just write down voter perception on your piece of paper. It's looking a little bit more about, well, what is their role specifically? Do they have additional parts of what they do that you can tap into that resonates with voters, that's a little bit more environmentally minded and that sort of thing. And so it's getting all of those those bits and pieces of research around like kind of, what does that decision maker care about that's really, really important. And an example of this that I could kind of get a personal example would be when myself and the Brighton Hove Swift group, we were able to successfully get a condition put in place to provide Swift bricks and also B bricks alongside in the same condition in all new development across the city. And that was approved by Brighton Hove City Council. And by working with two councillors in particular, one of which was even a beekeeper as well, which is really good sort of because already preaching to the converted and that understanding of like kind of the value of things like bee bricks and stuff like that, someone that's already in that sort of that sphere and that circle. We were really able to sort of showcase that novel approach to Swift brick and bee brick policy that would enable us to achieve our goal to support Swifts and provide new nest opportunities. That's the overarching goal of Brighton Hove Swifts. But also as well able to sort of showcase to the councillors involved, about like kind of the importance of this matter and the sort of the press and the sort of the legacy essentially that they were creating for their time as councillors and how good that would be for them as well. So it's sort of a mutually beneficial sort of scenario. And other examples might include things like water companies. I mean, their motivations might be a slightly trickier to identify. So, if you're looking to target water companies, their motivations would be things like satisfying the regulations of Ofwat, which are essentially the sort of regulatory authority for water services. And that would be the main thing that they care about alongside things like business and financial incentives and other things. I won't go into too much detail about that in this presentation because it's quite a lengthy subject. But I will cover that in a topic on campaigning for water, which will be another webinar in this series. So do keep an eye out for that. So then you've done all of that research, that background research on what your goals are, your vision, who's that audience, what are they really sort of interested in and motivated in, and then you can now you can have a good idea of how to target the issue. So the first step in this is really to consider what your resources are and your potential resources, in the future. And this could include things like current or potential members and supporters that you have for your cause, your wider network as well. So with other interested groups that there might be similar groups to you that you can tap into and gain support for in organizations similarly in the community that you work with. And then also as well, do you have any like social media accounts or do you know anyone in that sort of sphere of media that might be able to sort of help that you can tap into to sort of really showcase what you're all about and get the word out and spread the message. And then also as well, importantly is being science driven. So things like kind of, the sort of the knowledge base of your cause, facts, reports, evidence on the issue that you're campaigning around. And then also as well, I meant to put an additional bullet point on this, but funding as well, how much funding that you have available to you, that might be able to help you to, put a bit of money towards getting an article in a local magazine or a newsletter, that sort of thing, just sort of to showcase again what your campaign's all about and to reach a wider audience. So these are all the things that you would consider at this sort of fourth step of those 5 kind of key questions, and ultimately you can sort of just sum up a successful campaign, and this is what I'm sort of trying to sort of represent in this webinar is regardless of the tools that are being used, is only going to be strongest through good organizing and working together. So looking at that sort of scale of impact is really, really important. How do we scale up our efforts and get a unified voice? So that's looking at those, those current and potential members and supporters and that wider network and how you can tap into others to help to really drive forward that campaign. In this last section of the webinar, I'm just going to go over a range of campaigning tools at your disposal. So this list is not exhaustive, but just covers the four of the main campaigning tools or groups of tools that are available to you. And it's also not a case of just pick just one and run with it. You know, there will likely, very likely be a few different options that you can go down to really help to guide your campaign. And it's best to just sort of sit down and consider what combination will be the most effective based on all the information that you've gathered thus far. So how much resource do you have to get involved in in a public demonstration in terms of people, for example? You know, do you have enough people to really get out there and try and organize a march? Do you have enough information around like kind of all the ins and outs of that? Are you at that right sort of stage in that time to in order to be able to to make that decision? As conservation organizations, this is exactly the sorts of things that the sort of decisions that we're making internally when we're looking at creating an effective campaign and tapping into a multitude of these different tools to help sort of shape what we can do and what we can deliver on. So firstly, we are going to look at petitions. So petitions can be a great way to get momentum and bring a campaign to life in the public forum. So there are a few different types of petitions that you can look at getting involved with. So we've got two examples of e-petitions, and I've just separated them because they're just slightly nuanced and a little bit different. But firstly, we've got things like responses to national policy from environmental NGOs, or ENGOs. And that's environmental non-government organizations. So apologies, there are a couple of acronyms in here, but I do define all of them. So hopefully there's no confusion with those. But yeah, so for example, these are the sorts of things that there's the sort of bread and butter of conservation organizations. Is there might be national policy consultations that come out, an opportunity to represent your views on upcoming potential changes that are happening across the UK. And conservation organizations will tap into these. They'll read through all the documentation, understand them, and then create things like calls to actions that will go out to members and just general members of the public to give them an opportunity to also put their voices forward. And they might be designed in a way in which the main body of text has already been created for someone to sort of submit a letter to their MP if that's the avenue that needs to be taken to respond to these policies. Or there might be a consultation page that again might have certain aspects of it already filled in, just to give that little bit of direction for people wanting to get involved with them with a campaign. And I'm saying that conservation organizations do this on a regular basis, but it's not to say that individual campaigns on a smaller level as well, aren't able to sort of use these sorts of mechanisms to try and kind of galvanize a lot more energy and input into the causes. And then we have other types of e-petitions as well that are, more around like kind of local issues and more targeted campaigns. So there are a whole suite of different e-petition websites that you can use to start up your own petitions to try and kind of galvanize interest and get people's signatures put down, so that then you can showcase the number of people that are also interested in the topic that you're trying to campaign for. And then we have local council petitions, which again, I've sort of separated from the local issues and targeted campaigns, e-petitions, but they are kind of very similar in terms of like kind of what they're looking to achieve. So each local authority will have a slightly different way that they take to these, but often you can find on the local authority websites, you can see petitions that can be created from members of the public that can go out to residents on a particular issue, and you can send the link to people and you can get people to put their name down to it. And often it will be either that the local authority will have their own kind of petitions, like sort of page on the website that you can create them on there, or you can create your own e-petitions on a another site and then just send the local authority the link to that petition to showcase the amount of signatures that you've got. And these are really important because these can be one of the first initial steps to having that conversation with your local council around your issue, and having the opportunity to potentially either have them talk about the issue in a committee, or that you're able to represent your issue and speak on behalf of your group and your campaign and present that to a committee or to full council at the local council. And like I say, it ranges between council to council on how this process works, but it's a really important part of local kind of campaign issues, and trying to get that coverage and representation of your local council, and getting their interest in your cause. We then have public demonstrations. So there are a few ways that campaign groups might consider this tool. So it could be things like a march if you have a large number of people, and by marches we mean, having a group of people that are physically moving from point A to B. And I'm separating that out from the next one, which is, things like gatherings outside of an important area for your campaign, because there are particular nuances to like kind of the laws around things like stationary demonstrations and marches and things that you have to consider. So if anyone is considering things like public demonstrations, then please do ensure that all responsibilities are known and you've read through things like the Public Order Act and everything like that. But public demonstrations, if you've got the a really strong level of support and momentum in your campaign, then they can be a really, really powerful tool for getting that message out there, getting that sort of that media coverage for your campaign. And then again, you've got things like comms opportunities as well. So this could be, you might organize a meeting with your MP that has a bit of a photo opportunity that obviously works for the MP because they have a photo opportunity talking to kind of their constituents and that sort of thing. But also as well, it gives you that press for your particular campaign that you can hopefully help to drive forward and get more people that might be interested in that campaign. We then have responses to central government policy and consultations. So again, there's a variety of ways that you can get involved with national and/or county level campaigning. So conservation organisations will often be involved with these sorts of consultations and use a combination of things like what we've discussed before, petitions and public demonstrations and responses to consultations to achieve a positive outcome for their campaign. So it's tapping into all of those sort of tools, and this one can often be a combination of what we've discussed before. So it's just one sort of one tool that you can use, and there are a few examples for these. So you've got things like national legislation consultations. So that taps into what I was talking about before in terms of petitions and getting petitions set up so you can put forward your own representation for a consultation, but you might want to also have more voices that are also saying the same thing. So that's where you might set up a sort of a call for action where you get people to put forward very, very similar responses to that consultation, so that people can see patterns and see a sort of uniformity in thought of people for a campaign. And that can be much more effective than if you're doing that in isolation from each other, because it's the more people that are saying the same thing, then the more likely it's going to be listened to. We also have things like consultations on county-wide policy, so things like local nature recovery strategies or LNRSs. So there's just been a load of information that's been released for Sussex's local nature recovery strategy that I know that we at the Trust are busy looking through and reading through, just to sort of get an understanding of how that's taking shape, because I think it's like a 400-page document which is absolutely obscene, but it's really looking to shape that county level understanding of how we are going to be managing the natural environment and monitoring it and all those sorts of aspects. So we really want to make sure that things like the local nature recovery strategies are being done right. And so feeding into that is going to be absolutely critical, and ensuring that we can put that in a digestible form for anyone that's wishing to support us in our sort of stances on it as well is equally going to be critical, so that we can get as many people as possible understanding and then feeling empowered to wanting to join forces and protect our natural environment through that. We also have things like non-local planning authority, that should say consultations, not consultants. But so these are things like NSIPs, which are nationally significant infrastructure projects, or things like MMO applications. So MMO stands for Marine Management Organization. I'm throwing a lot of words out here. Don't worry too much about the ins and outs of what I'm sort of talking about here. I'll be providing a lot more information around like some of these aspects later on through our journey through the world of community campaigners. So if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed by this, please try not to, because yeah, we will sort of provide a lot more sort of information around like kind of what all these things mean, and if it's not anything that's relevant to what you're wanting to do, then you don't have to find out more about it, but we're just trying to kind of get as much information as possible in the right kind of ways so that people can understand them, and if it is something that you are interested in, then yeah, further information will come about that as well. But these are sort of separate things that come outside of like kind of the usual planning application routes or local plans, which I will talk about now. So the other aspect is responding to local government policy and consultations, which just operates because central government and local governments are just two separate entities. They just work in slightly different ways. So so this can be a really effective tool as well to enact local action and determine local issues. Unfortunately, though, response rates from the public for local planning is considerably low. So you're looking at like kind of 10% response rate from like kind of members of public, and that might be a little bit optimistic as well. So we can really increase our voices and the voices for nature by being more involved in shaping local policy, and outside of local plan consultations and periods of policy making, petitions, again, as I'd mentioned before, can be a really valuable way of bringing attention to your issue. I'm very mindful of time because we've only got 3 minutes left of the sort of the allotted time for the meeting. So I'll just quickly just go through a few examples at Sussex Wildlife Trust of exactly what I was just talking about in terms of the tools and how we've implemented them into our campaign. So things like the Planning and Infrastructure Bill. We had an e-action, like a calls to action to get people to write to their MP, to talk about how disappointed we all are with the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, and the sort of the lack of safeguards, and the reduction in safeguards for the natural environment, and we're still working on that, and I think there's been a recent update as well in terms of the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, that will mean that there will be some more kind of communications from the Wildlife Trust around that in the not too distant future. We also have the Brighton Marina dredging demonstration. So those of you that aren't aware, so we've been fighting really hard to prevent the essentially to the licensing for dredging at the Brighton Marina, where there are considerable impacts on the marine conservation zone that is adjacent to the marina, where that sort of dredged material will be pumped out into. And one of the examples of the tools that we were using was a demonstration where we went to the marina, and we had people, it was a sort of stationary demonstration where we had signs and we had some media pieces and that sort of thing to help to really sort of showcase our cause and our campaign, and try to sort of galvanize interest in that as well. We've had responses to national consultations to ban bottom trawling across all UK marine protected areas. So this is an example of responding to national consultations that central government had had given the opportunity for people to submit their views on. And this was delivered by the Wildlife Trust as a whole, so the UK-wide sort of organisation, the umbrella Wildlife Trust and Sussex Wildlife Trust also were sort of driving this forward and this campaign. And then also as well, just to cover our local sort of engagement, on a regular basis, we have our conservation team that are responding to local plans all across Sussex. So it's looking at all the ins and outs of environmental policy and strategic sites and all the things that might be able to help to increase nature in and across Sussex and the local authorities, whilst also as well trying to stop development and from harm happening to those protected areas and important spaces for nature through the local plans and responding to them. So that was a whistle-stop tour of everything as an introduction to campaigners, and I hope everyone found that useful. Like I said, I will be following up this webinar with a whole range of different content and things that we can do to gain some more information around campaigning and campaigning for nature. So I will be providing a document. It'll be a little bit later down the line. I just need to sort of type up everything in terms of the content of this webinar, some links to further reading, which I have also on this slide as well. So if anyone's interested in any of the sort of things that I've mentioned in this webinar, these sort of 5 points are a bit of a starter for 10 for just sort of getting a little bit more information around the particular sort of topics and themes that I've been talking about, and then as well, like I say, some extra information around all things kind of campaign will also be available for everyone after the webinar.